Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about editing, style, and pacing in modern cinema. This hopefully brief discussion is inspired a little bit by one of my comments from Happy Dappy Man about how movies today seem to talk the plot to people. And I do agree. I notice that a lot. And one of the reasons that I think that exists is because of some of the modern trends in cinema as far as pacing and editing things together goes. And I'm going to give two really concrete examples to compare that I think are a really ideal comparison. One is a scene from the original Star Wars movie from 1977, from Episode 4, and the other is a scene from the new Star Wars movie from last year, Episode 7, Force Awakens. Now, if you go watch the first one, both of these are the attack on the Death Star, right? So the first one's the attack on the original Death Star, the second one's the attack on the Starkiller base. And regardless of your opinion of either movie, I think you can kind of see some of the points that I'd like to point out when you compare each of these scenes. And I'll link both of them below, so please do check them out. The first one is the famous trench run scene where a bunch of little rebel fighters go and attack the Death Star, trying to shoot some torpedoes into a little hole and blow up the whole mess. The second one is a group of X-Wings, a group of little fighters, attack one large building that has some vulnerable points on it to destroy this planet-sized Death Star sort of device. So they're both set up kind of the same way. They both use the same sort of ships, the same sort of setup with squadrons, the same ultimate plot outcome, but they're pretty radically different in their execution. The original scene, the scene from the original Star Wars movie, is almost 15 minutes long. That attack scene's 15 minutes long. It comes at the very end of the movie. It's the climax of the movie. The second one has about 4 minutes of screen time spent on this actual attack on the base. And part of the reason for that, to excuse, I guess, Episode 7 a bit, is that there's actually several different plot climaxes happening at one time in Episode 7. So there is we need to destroy the Starkiller base. Then there's also a fight between some of the characters, like a lightsaber battle that's happening virtually at the same time. And they're kind of cutting between them a little bit as this goes on, and then everybody sort of escapes and gets away. So if you just look at the scene that has this sort of concentrated plot element, destroy the Death Star, you see that there's a lot less going on total, right? So there's a lot less focus on what this attack is. Now, I think also Episode 7 in general reflects a more modern attitude towards editing and pacing, which is to make the pace faster and to make the editing tighter. So you're usually going to get 24 to 48 frames of any given visual that is being shown to you in some of these modern movies, and I think Episode 7 is a great example. So in the example below, there are times where you only get 48 frames, and I'm saying frames because we're talking 2 seconds, sometimes less than 2 seconds, but it's enough for your brain to see the image and sort of process what you saw slightly before they move on. So they're trying to give you only as much as you need to figure out what's going on. When you do that, that means you can cram a lot more into it. And I think the modern style is really about putting as much action into one of these action movies as possible, making them as action-packed as possible, which means that they're not going to be boring, right? That's the fear, is that you never want to bore somebody at an action movie. So you just try to keep the tension up at the max the whole time. You just cut everything very, very tight. Now, what you give up when you do that is some of the tools that you have to visually tell the story of what you're doing. So if you watch the original trench run, there's very little dialogue. The setup for the trench run is established before the scene begins. There's a scene where Jan Ors talks to the fighters and says, "This is what you're trying to do." And then there's this scene where they're all getting into their fighters and flying off. Then they sort of begin their attack. In the Episode 7 scene, they're explaining the objectives of the attack while they're doing it to each other, which to me comes off as a rather sort of cringy experience, because I don't believe that the characters would actually say that. So there's this part where Poe looks up at the sun and goes, "Remember, when the sun goes away, then they can fire." As if they wouldn't have already known that as part of their briefing, or the audience hasn't figured that out. So there's a bunch of dialogue in this newer one that is functional, not between the characters functional, but functional in the sense that, hey, we're telling you what the plot is going on because these visuals we don't have enough time of the visuals. We have 3 minutes and 45 seconds or so of visuals to tell you what's going on versus 15 minutes of visuals to really tell you what's going on. You have a lot less visual space to tell that story, so you cram in some dialogue. There's some shots of like the cockpit, a cockpit scene, and then they tell you what they're doing. It's like, oh, great attack, but we didn't do a direct hit. It's like, we could have inferred that if you had enough time to see that like the effect was meaningless. And there is some functional dialogue in the original episode 4 version where it's like, oh, it didn't go in. But the dialogue's pretty sparse, and you can kind of see what's happening by watching it happen. You can watch, Darth Vader's little squadron blow up some fighters. You can have a really good idea of what's going on. Now, the total effect of those two, I consider like radically different. So if we look at the first one, we have 15 minutes of essentially tension building up. And we've been building up to the plot goal of destroying the Death Star for 2 hours. And then we get 15 minutes of now we're attacking it. Everything is at stake. Everything could be lost. And there's even a part where George Lucas has one of the fighters shoots the torpedoes, and there's an explosion, and you see inside the Death Star like some stormtroopers fall over, and you think, was he successful? And they kind of pull you back into it. No, it wasn't successful. In the newer version, we have sort of the same thing where they just attack this building. A couple fighters attack this giant building, and then they're like, oh, we didn't get a direct hit. But we only had, seconds to really see what they were doing, so we didn't have a lot of build-up hoping that would be successful. We don't really have a lot of build-up in like, oh, I can't wait for them to be successful in this plot endeavor, because everything is so tightly cut and it's so tightly paced. There's not a lot of feeling of tension building up. So I want you to look at those two scenes. Please let me know what you think about them too in your comparisons. The things that really stick out to me, like I said, the time, the tension, what's shown visually and what's not shown visually. Now the new one is very visually complex. There's a lot going on, and it is visually well done. However, we don't really get to see what they're doing. There's even a part where like they fly into a trench, and we're not sure why they do it. Because that hasn't been explained, and then they kind of say, well, there's an opening and let's go for it, and then they do it, and maybe that's enough for us to understand that they need to do that, but we don't quite it's kind of a harkening back to the first scene, but it lasts literally mere seconds before everything blows up. We don't have any sort of tension of them hoping to get into the right spot. So the tension difference is massive, and the dialogue difference is really massive. I thought the dialogue in the new version was really like kind of painting the plot for you. It's like, in case you didn't get it, here's what's going on. And I actually think that is somewhat necessary, because when you make action that is cut that tightly, the audience can easily lose track of what you're doing, and they need you to tell them. Otherwise, there's people who are going to be like, what's happening? They're not really going to get it. So take a look at those two. Give me your thoughts. Give me your opinions. This is just 2 concrete examples of what I think represents sort of a trend in cinema. And there's probably many more that we can explore, and many more that we might, that we should explore. But these are 2 good ones. I always like to start with concrete examples. Even though this is kind of anecdotal, I think they're really good because they're like the same movie, the first version and the second version of the same movie, and so the comparisons are really easy to make. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Please let me know what you want to see and what you want to hear. I am always trying to work to fulfill those requests, because if you want it, then chances are other people want it, and I want to serve that need. So thanks so much, and have a great day.